ever visited a place and then only later realised that you missed the most important bit? Scotland is full of wonderful history, and I'm making a series of videos to point out things that tourists miss when it's right under their nose. So, what might Harry Potter tourists miss in one of their top tourist locations? If you're interested in the people, places and events in Scottish history, then click the subscribe button at the bottom right of the screen. And if you enjoy the video, give a thumbs up and share with others like you. In the meantime, let me tell you a story. Now, there are two reasons I'm making these videos. One is that my videographer Matt told me an interesting statistic recently. Philadelphia is one of the USA's most historic towns. It's where America's Declaration of Independence was signed. Lots of tourists who go there go to see the Liberty Bell, an icon of America's story of independence. But many more tourists to Philadelphia will go to climb the steps from the Sylvester Stallone film Rocky. Da-da-da, 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 da-da-da-da-da-da-da. You know the one. Pop culture swamps essential history. So what do Harry Potter tourists miss when they come to Edinburgh? Let's go to Greyfriars Churchyard. Now, obviously, we'll pass Greyfriars Bobby. The statue of the wee Doug, who had 2 films made about him, is just an appetizer for what we're going to see. There's no doubt Harry Potter is the biggest draw to this churchyard. You see, they tell me that when J.K. Rowling was writing her book in Edinburgh, she'd walk through this graveyard and the surrounding area to gain inspiration. Harriet's school over there is just one of the many Edinburgh private schools that must seem like Hogwarts. This is a memorial to McGonagall. I see Harry Potter tours here all the time. One's passed already. Now, obviously, this isn't a memorial to Professor McGonagall, but a real person. The poet William Topaz McGonagall. Now, don't get me wrong, he wasn't a great poet. Beautiful railway bridge of the Silvery Tay, alas, I am very sorry to say that 90 lives have been taken away on the last Sabbath day of 1879, which will be remembered for a very long time. Shite. But he was an incredible character and definitely part of Scottish cultural heritage. I know in the past, as an alternative to a Burns supper, I've organised a McGonagall supper. And it had recitations and food, starting with coffee and mince, moving on to pudding, then meat, and then starter, and you get the idea. Several YouTubers have made videos about him, and I'm not going to give Harry Potter tour guides a hard time, because I do see them, to be fair, explaining who the real McGonagall is as they relate it to the fictional character. No, there's a much bigger thing missed when Harry Potter fans come to this churchyard. Do you see this? The constant footfall here means that they've had to reinforce the pathway of this gravestone. Why? Because it's the gravestone of Tom Riddle. I'll be honest, I don't know anything about this guy either. Other than the fact that in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, the letters of the name Tom Marvolo Riddle rearranged themselves in an anagram of I am Lord Voldemort from the parchment of Tom Riddle's diary. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's not right. She must have been left with an extra D. Like a cocky Scrabble player that's just been shown up with the last play of the game because he looks like a dauber with 1D. What are you going to do with the extra D, mate? Well, add an F and a U and it'll make you a FUD.
It's an extra L.
What?
It's not a D, it's an L.
More important things have happened in this graveyard. As our Harry Potter fans wear away footpaths en route to the grave of that name that shouldn't be spoken, what they don't realise is that right here, people gathered to sign one of the most important documents in world history. If you're British, it led to the War of the Three Kingdoms and the English Civil War. If you're American, it led to your Revolutionary War. Let's not kid ourselves. Rebellion. Scots celebrate the Declaration of Arbroath. The English vaunt Magna Carta. Americans trumpet their Declaration of Independence. But this document was as important, maybe more important than all three. It's certainly the bridge between them, the glue that binds all three together. And I'm going to tell you why it's even more important as a document than the Potions book of the Half-Blood Prince. I've talked in other videos about the 14th century Declaration of Arbroath and how a letter became a Declaration of Independence and now an iconic symbol of nationhood. One of the 7 Horcruxes of Scotland. It talks of our history, our king, his duties to the people, and our right to elect an alternative. You can come back to the link top right for videos on the topic. I'm sure there's an English History Tours guy who's talked about his stuff. The legal rights, justice, due process, and the limits of royal authority bestowed on Englishmen by Magna Carta 100 years before. I constantly hear our American cousins talk of 1776 and their Declaration of Equality and Freedom, the role of government and the right to oppose it. What you probably don't think of is how these 3 documents are linked by one signed in this churchyard on the 28th of February 1638. Actually, the paintings of the event show it being signed in this churchyard, but that's a bit of artistic license. At 8 p.m. on a February evening, it would be dark. The National Covenant was signed inside the church, but with a capacity of 800, the people inside would be the devotees, the influential, and the early. If you hadn't set up your deck chair the night before, then you'd be with the hundreds standing outside by the light of flickering torches on a cold February evening. Folks watching from the US puff out their chests at the slogan of no taxation without representation, not realising that these were campaign issues litigated 150 years before in England. And England is not the UK, by the way. It was all as a result of Charles I using a thing called ship money to raise taxes when he'd shut down Parliament and taken personal rule in 1629. Now, the English History Tours guy will give you all the detail on that. I'm here to tell you how the line that joins 1630s London and 1770s Philadelphia passes through this church every bit as literally as the costumed witches and wizards who lead their tour groups through the graveyard every day. You see, whilst this whole ship money, locked Parliament tension was bubbling in Charles's kingdom at the south, he had another problem up here. Other tourists in Edinburgh will go to St Giles Cathedral and see where the whole hoo-ha started when Charles tried to impose his English bishops and prayer book in this very different kingdom. Again, I'll leave a link top right to videos with a bit more detail, but that's what brought us to this church. A Fife minister and an Edinburgh solicitor drew up a document called the National Covenant. The English were complaining about taxation without representation. The Scots were taking a step further. You see, in England, the king was head of the church. But the Scots said, we're not having that. We're not having him appoint bishops to govern our freedom of worship. We'll have elections. That's right. We'll elect people, and they'll run the church, the programmes for the poor, and much of what we'd see as local government today. And when folks gathered here to sign that document in 1638, at a time when the church governed every aspect of life, they were setting out Presbyterian principles that they and their descendants would take across the Atlantic. In the wars that were sparked by signing this document, many suffered and died as a consequence. Some are remembered on the memorial in the graveyard outside here. Others are remembered by their transatlantic descendants who comment and tell me their great-great-grand relatives captured at the Battle of Worcester or the Battle of Dunbar, or travelling by some other means later. One of the other principles of Presbyterianism was the idea that folks should be able to read the scriptures for themselves. This led to higher literacy rates in Scotland and gave us its Enlightenment, whose ideas crossed the Atlantic at a time when Voltaire said it's to Scotland that we look for our ideas of civilization. They tell me that those ideas, as well as those in the Declaration of Arbroath, found their form in that New World Declaration. Now, there's something really special that I want to show you. But first, let me say that on the weekend that this goes live, I should be heading to the New World Down Under with my stand-up comedy show, Scotland Made the World. Click the link top right or the one in the description below for tickets for shows in Perth, Adelaide, Melbourne, Hobart, Canberra, Sydney, Brisbane, Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch and Dunedin. There will also be links for Scottish shows, and Canadian dates will come later. If in doubt, go to www.brucefummey.co.uk. Now, I said I'd show you something special. And here, inside Greyfriars Kirk, we've got an actual version of that document first signed here in 1638. This is one of the key steps on the road to modern democracy. I often hear our American cousins talk as if this was something that they invented. In truth, it was a continuous process that went through many steps along the way. The English will say it began with Magna Carta. The Scots will say it began with our Declaration of Arbroath. But it passed through here before it reached your shores. I think I can hear the Liberty Bell ringing from here. Here is where the covenant was signed. Copies were sent out all over Scotland. Now, the cynic might say, hold on, Bruce. The American Declaration of Independence is just a document negotiated a couple hundred years ago by a bunch of gentry pressurising a king who was already weaker than Parliament in order to secure their position. And nobody's truly honoured it. Americans just convinced themselves it bestows rights and freedoms that ordinary people never really had. And I'd say, that's not far from the truth. You might say, Magna Carta was no more than a document negotiated 800 years ago by English nobles pressurising that king in order to secure their position, and nobody truly honoured it. English folk just convinced themselves of some grand foundation of English liberties. I'd say maybe. You say the Declaration of Arbroath is just a document negotiated 700 years ago by the King of Scots, pressurising his nobles to secure his position. And nobody truly honoured it. Scottish folks just convinced themselves of its democratic freedoms. And I'd say, now hold on there, matey. You've taken this too far. Are you looking for a bang in the puss? I'll rip the head off you. Shut it! Let's be honest. Whether you're Scottish, English, or American, these documents are to some extent part of the national psyche. Rhetorically designed fairy stories that have allowed people to feed you a bunch of imaginary bullshit. I'm giving you the real bullshit. The document signed here was the bullshit that holds all the other bullshit together. It passes the baton of bullshit from one nation and generation to another. The point is, I know that we all have national stories that we tell ourselves to ensure compliance, bind patriotic fervour, or justify atrocities. I'm just saying that if you ignore the French Revolution, there's a self-congratulatory story told in the Anglo-Saxon Free West that I've narrowed down to 3 countries. And the national covenant signed here, along with Enlightenment ideas developed in the streets round about, are a fundamental part of that thinking. Now, I'm not here to endorse one set of values or another. Jacobites contributed to the New World as well as Covenanters. I'm just making the point that people come to this churchyard every day to see the inspiration for a fictional story of how witches and wizards struggled, fought, and some died in an imaginary magical world so that people could be free from the tyranny of a Lord and Master. If you do that, then surely it's worth taking the time to step inside and celebrate people who waged that struggle in real life. I also went to an Outlander tourism film location to tell you about some of the important real world history in that place. That video is coming up on screen now. Support the channel by clicking top right to become a Patreon member or buy me a coffee in the description below. In the meantime, ha mbeidh an dóchas go bia lama life. Chéri an drasta.